In this video, we're going to talk about supply and demand. So up until this point, we have talked about scarcity, and that economics is the study of scarcity. Because of scarcity, we have unlimited wants and limited resources to fulfill those wants. So we have to make choices. And so that economics is the study of those choices that we make. The resources that we have with which to fulfill our unlimited wants are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And then we have subdivided capital into three types of capital. So if capital is any tool that makes our job more productive, then physical capital are the tools, the physical tools which make our jobs more productive. Human capital is the education and training that makes our workers more productive. And financial capital is the money that makes us more productive because we can all do more when we have more money. So we've learned about our productive resources, and then we've looked at opportunity costs, that every time we make a decision to do or make one thing, we give up the opportunity to be able to do, have, or make another thing. And so the more we do of one thing, the less we can do of another. So we've gotten to that point. And so finishing up the bit of microeconomics that we need to understand before we move into the major macro studies is we need to understand supply and demand and how they interact in a market. So when we're talking about supply and demand, we're talking primarily about market and mixed economies. Remember, the difference is a market economy is one in which people and businesses, private citizens, make all of the decisions. There is no government interference except for protection of private property rights. A command economy would be where the government makes all of the decisions, answering those economic questions of what to make, how to make it, and for whom to make it. And every economy in the world is a mixed economy, somewhere in that scale of left to right, on both an economic and political basis. So, but when we're talking about supply and demand, we're talking about interactions in a market economy. We are taking out all government interference. So again, this is a model of what things would be like if there were no government interference. So we're going to start with demand today, and then we'll do supply tomorrow, and then we will put them together in a supply and demand graph day after tomorrow. But demand is the one that we're most familiar with because we're all demanders of things. So we're going to look at demand now. So demand is the relationship between two variables, and those variables are price, not cost, but price, and quantity demanded. So the price is whatever price the item whatever you will pay for it. And quantity demanded is how many people will buy at that particular price. So right now, what I want for you to do is I want for you to get out your graph paper. I want you to pause the video in just a moment, and I want for you to graph this chart. When you do that, I want for you to remember that price is going to be on your y-axis. So your vertical axis, let's get a little pen here. So we're working in your first quadrant only, and you will label your y-axis P for price, and you will label in even increments from 140. You can count by 10s or 20s so long as you get up to 300 up here. And then you will label quantity on your x-axis, and you can count by 1s or 2s and go all the way out to 18. So remember, it's backwards from math. In math, when you go over and up, here we go up and over because price is always on our y-axis. Why is the price so high? This is how you remember this. Why is the price so high? Price and y are on the y-axis. So you would go up to 140 and over to 18, up to 160 and over to 14. So pause the video now and be able to and go ahead and graph this. You should have ended up with a demand curve that looks like this. When you do that, make sure you label the bottom right-hand corner of your graph D for demand. We say this, that the devil goes down in the dirt, demand goes down So your demand curve will slope downward. So yours should be prettier than this, but you should have your graph with price labeled on the y-axis, quantity labeled on the x-axis, and a downward sloping demand curve labeled D on the bottom right-hand corner. All right, so let's look at this and talk about what the law of demand actually says. So the law of demand says when the price goes up, the quantity demanded decreases. Okay, when the price goes up, the quantity demanded decreases. This makes good sense because when prices go up, you're going to buy less stuff. When the price goes down, the quantity demanded will increase. So this is why businesses put things on sale. They lower the price so that more people will come in and buy things. So when price goes down, the quantity demanded increases. They are negatively related because when one goes up, the other goes down. This is why your demand curve slopes downward. Okay, so the demand curve slopes downward because quantity demanded is negatively related to the price. When price increases, quantity demanded decreases, and when price decreases, quantity demanded increases. So there are three reasons why this happens. Okay, the first one is the real income effect. The second one is the substitution effect, and the third one is diminishing marginal utility. The first two are not that difficult. They're things that you probably are aware of and you just don't think about on a regular basis. The third one is something that you probably haven't ever really thought about, but once we go into it, it'll make good sense. All right, the real income effect says that if your income stays the same and prices go up, you can't buy as much stuff. Your purchasing power decreases. So you're going to buy. So the law of demand is what it is. When prices go up, people buy less because when prices go up and your income stays the same, you can't buy as much. You have to buy less because your income won't stretch as far. Same thing happens is if price goes down and your income stays the same, it feels like you made more money. This is going to be really important later when we talk about inflation and how it impacts our real income. So if prices go up and your income stays the same, you won't be able to buy as many things because it's going to stretch your income. The substitution effect says that if you believe that two items are viable substitutes for each other, that you're going to buy the one that's cheaper. This is why we have Great Value brand in the store. There are some things that you won't buy Great Value brand because you don't think the Great Value brand is a good substitute for the name brand, but there are some times that you will. I always like to use Gatorade and Powerade, and for some of you, Gatorade and Powerade might not be viable substitutes for each other. You might find one really good and one really disgusting. But for the most part, they're both sports drinks. They're substitutes for each other. And so we used to sell Gatorades in the cafeteria. I'm not sure that that's still a thing, but if the price of Gatorade increases, you're gonna buy more Powerade because if the price of Gatorade increases, the quantity demanded for Gatorade will go down and the demand for Powerade will go up. Makes good sense. If two things are relatively substitutable, right? I'm not sure that's a real word, but if you can substitute them, you're going to buy the one that costs less because why wouldn't you? All right, the last one is diminishing marginal utility, and this is the one that is the most kind of confusing, or the ones the one you haven't thought about before. So I like to show Man versus Food a lot. I'll link a video on Google Classroom of a Man versus Food episode, but let's think about what Adam Richmond does when he's eating these things. I don't know if you've ever seen Man versus Food, or at least the old ones. But so the first thing that we need to understand is utility means satisfaction, okay, or usefulness that you can get out of something. We've already talked about that margin means each additional one. And obviously diminishing means lessening or lowering. So what this is saying is that our satisfaction for each additional unit gets lower. Okay, so we get less satisfaction each time we gain another item. Okay, and so when we're thinking about man versus food, he starts off eating this big old pizza and he's like, oh, this is so good. It's so delicious. It's yummy. By the time he gets about halfway through, he's starting to not feel well. And for each additional bite that he takes, he gets less and less satisfaction. The first bite is really delicious. The third bite is really delicious. Maybe not as delicious as the first bite. By the time he gets to the last bite, he's really about to vomit and throw up, and in some of the episodes he actually does. So it's every bite that he takes, he gets less satisfaction from. And you're going to not buy after you're not going to get satisfaction from things anymore. For instance, when you go normally, your family goes to buy pizza, you're going to buy the amount that your family will eat. Maybe so you'll have a little bit of leftovers. But you're not going to just buy unlimited amounts of pizza because either A, you're going to feel sick if you eat that much, or B, it's going to go to waste. You're not getting satisfaction from it. So you stop purchasing at the point where you're not going to get satisfaction. This is why places have 2-for-1 deals or 3-for-2 deals, things like that, to get you to purchase more past your last unit of satisfaction. Other examples of this would be everybody pretty much has a refrigerator in their house. And there are a lot of people who have 2 refrigerators in their house, but there are not a whole lot of people who have 3 refrigerators at their house, because the first refrigerator is the one in your kitchen, the one you get the most usefulness out of. The second refrigerator you might use for holdover items. At my house, the second refrigerator is used for bottled waters and sports drinks and things like that we don't keep inside. It's not our regular food. At Thanksgiving or Christmas, it might hold the extra stuff, but it's not as useful to us. We don't use it every single day like we do the one inside. And then a third refrigerator is what you would not use, or it might be a small refrigerator, a dorm size in your house that's not quite as useful as the first 2. And you're not going to keep buying unlimited amounts of refrigerators because you don't need them. They're not useful to you and they're expensive. Okay, so diminishing marginal utility means you will stop purchasing things when they become not useful to you anymore. And for each one you get, or each thing you do or have, you get less and less satisfaction from it. All right. Okay, so you've drawn a demand curve and you've seen that there are the 3 things that make this law of demand be a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. But that demand curve doesn't always stay in that same point. It can shift to the right or to the left. So if it shifts to the right, that means there has been an increase in demand. And if there is a shift to the left, that means there is a decrease in demand. All right, so at this point, we got to stop and we've got to learn a new word. And that new word is called ceteris paribus. I wish there was a way that I could type in here. I'm not sure that I know how to do that. All right. Ceteris. This should look like etc. Okay, etc. means and other things. Okay, so ceteris means other things, and paribus means equal. All right, or same. Okay, so ceteris paribus means we assume everything else is equal or everything else doesn't change, right? So that's going to be a term that you hear me say a lot, because you're going to ask me questions and my answer is going to be ceteris paribus. You can't assume that other things are going to happen. We know that they might in real life, but we're dealing with models here. So when we draw our demand curve, we're assuming ceteris paribus. We're assuming everything else is the same. Everything else is equal. Nothing else changes except the price. All right. So when the price changes, you will move along your demand curve, just like you did when you drew your demand curve and you looked at your chart and you plotted your points. When the price changed, you moved from one point on that curve to another point. But if something besides price changes, that curve will shift, and it will shift to the right if there's an increase in demand, and it will shift to the left if there is a decrease in demand. All right, so right now, Assume that demand has increased by 1 million bicycles at each price point. And you're going to plot that point on your graph now. So I'm going to scroll back to where the chart is and walk you through this for a second. All right, so here was our chart. So if demand increased 1 million, then now at 140, it's 19. And at 160, our demand is 15. And at 180, our demand is 12. And at 200, our demand is 10. Okay, so stop now, pause the video, and graph the new demand curve on the same page as your old demand curve. So on the exact same graph, you're going to graph the new line. So 140 and 19, 160 and 15, all of these increase by 1. So pause the video now and do that. Okay, what you should have seen is that your demand curve shifted to the right, that prices did not change, only demand changed. So with your new demand curve, you're going to label it D2 because it's your second demand curve. And if you can get arrows in between, I know yours is going to be really small. If you can get arrows in between, draw the arrows to the right. Don't draw them up or diagonal like that. Make them go straight across to the right because this will confuse you. So straight across to the right, draw your arrows. Okay, I'm going to go back to where we were and we'll see what those things were that are going to shift our demand curve. All right, our demand curve can be shifted, first of all, because of consumer preferences, right? If I always like to use silly bands, like from when y'all were little kids. Silly bands at one point were very, very popular among kids. Your consumer preference, a fad, a trend was to buy silly bands. And so when everybody was like, hey, silly bands are the cool thing to do, then the demand curve for silly bands shifted to the right because more people bought them. Okay, then we had information from schools that silly bands were causing a problem in the schools. And so they were either banned or your parents quit buying them. And so that information led for the demand for silly bands to decrease. It shifted to the left. The price did not change. People just quit buying them. So demand shifted to the left. The third thing that can change, that can shift a demand curve is income. If you make more money, you can buy more silly bands. If you make more money, you can buy more clothes. If you make more money, you can buy more food. If you make more money, you can buy more Gatorade. Okay, so income, how much money you make, will shift the demand to the right or left, depending on if you make more or less money. If you lose your job, your demand curve will shift to the left because you're going to buy fewer things. The number of consumers in a market. When a population grows, then there are going to be more consumers and demand will shift to the right. If population decreases, then demand will shrink and shift to the left. Your expectation of future prices. If you think something's going to go on sale next week, your demand right now will shift to the left. You are going to hold off buying things now because you're going to want to buy them in the future. So if you think the price in the future will go down, then your demand will shift to the left now. If you expect that prices are going to go up in the future, then you're going to buy a lot more right now because you want to get in on that good price before it goes up. So your demand will shift to the right now because you expect prices to be higher in the future. And then the other thing is prices of closely related goods. So closely related goods would be substitute goods, which we talked about earlier. This writing with this pen is not so great. Okay, so substitute goods are like Gatorade and Powerade, things that you would buy in place of each other. So if the price of Gatorade increases, then the demand for Powerade shifts to the right because people will buy more Powerade. Okay, so those would be substitute goods. Like you'll watch a video on Jacob Clifford and he uses milk and almond milk as substitutes. So if the price of cow's milk increases, you will demand more almond milk because your curve will shift to the right. The other closely related good is what we call complementary goods. Complementary goods are goods that you buy together. Okay, so complementary goods would be like peanut butter and jelly, bacon and eggs, salt and pepper, things that you, bagels and cream cheese, whatever it is that you always buy together. So what this means is that if the price of peanut butter increases, then you're not going to buy as much peanut butter. And if you don't buy peanut butter, you're also not going to buy jelly. So your demand for jelly would decrease. Same thing with cereal and milk is the one that Jacob Clifford uses in the video that you watch from him. If the price of milk increases, then you're going to buy less milk. If you buy less milk, you're also going to buy less cereal, because why buy the cereal if you don't have milk to put on it? So the prices of closely related goods are going to cause shifts in demand curves. Okay? And then let's make sure that we understand the difference. A shift in the demand curve is due to quantity demanded, or anything except price. A shift happens if anything but price changes. Movements along the demand curve occur when the price changes only. And that gets really confusing. So a shift is change in demand, anything but price. And a movement along the curve is a change in quantity demanded due to the price change. So a shift is it caused by anything but price changing. A movement along the curve is caused only by price changing. Okay, so that's on there twice for some reason. I'm not sure how that happened. Watch the Jacob Clifford video. He explains things much better than I do and in much more entertaining ways. Put him on about 75% because he talks even faster than I do. And then I will have a practice questions for demand for you to be looking at on the Google Classroom as well. And I will see you in the morning with any questions that you have for this video. See you then.